All right, so here we go with another review, and today I actually have Scott with me. Scott is one of our very active professionals on the Pro Feedback platform, so I'm really excited to have Scott Johnson. Sorry, his last name's Johnson. And Scott is a very positive guy, and that's one of the main reasons why I really wanted to bring him on board to be one of our professional reviewers, because it is it's delicate. It's a delicate thing to be able to take somebody's music and try to give constructive feedback to them. And I know for many of you guys, it's, anxiety driving to throw your music out there to somebody who will probably give you a lot of notes for how to improve it. And so I know how scary that can really be. But trust me, you are in good hands with Scott, because Scott has been very mindful about how he gives you feedback. So he is very positive. He's going to point out things that he loves about your track. But of course, just like with every professional on Pro Feedback, he's always going to be honest with you and let you know what you can do to improve it. So Scott is an amazing producer himself. He's gotten some amazing placements, and he's been working with some great libraries already in his sync career. So you're definitely in good hands with him. But let's go ahead and take a listen to this track today. This is from Mark Larman, one of our Pro Feedback members. This is a rock track. He wanted to know basically about the overall mix and master of it. And he had a big question about, some of these leads that he has in the track. He wants to know, are these leads too loud, too in your face? And would they work for a sync market, for a placement opportunity? So let's go ahead and take a listen, and we'll try to get him some notes. Here we go.
All right.
All right, very energetic. Definitely have a cool indie rock sort of vibe to it, and a very memorable lead melody for sure.
Absolutely.
Really, like, I can still sing it back in my head right now. So
Yeah.
that's always a sign that you were doing something very notable there. So
Yeah.
certainly a lot working for you, Mark, with this track, but I'm sure we can try to dive into some of the details here and hopefully try to steer it in a little bit more of a licensable direction if we possibly can. So why don't you start, Scott, with
Sure.
some things that you thought were working well about this
Okay,
track.
great. Well, first of all, Mark, this is a great track. I really like the energy. Like Jesse just said, the energy is fantastic, and you're able to kind of stick and keep that energy consistent throughout the whole track. At no point was I kind of waiting for that energy to come back, or it never kind of took a weird turn for me emotionally. So I found that it was a really great track in its consistency. That's some of the great things about this track. I loved the opening riff. I think that's a great, catchy track. Like Jesse, I can hear it in the back of my head right now. And, the sign of a great sync track is you can stand up, walk away, and it's still in your head, you know, and 5 minutes later, you can still hear that riff playing in your head because it's got that earworm kind of effectiveness. And that's so important for these kind of tracks because you want to be able to provide that memorable, you're selling a product essentially. Unfortunately, with music, you know, you don't always want to be that way, but in this case, you're selling a product, you're creating a mood or an atmosphere. And, you know, whether it's a specific commercial or a scene in a film or a trailer, you want to kind of attach your sound and your theme to that product. And I think that having something memorable like this is a really, really effective way to do it. Like you really pulled it off. You know, everything sounded really tight. The guitars were great. The drums, I loved the fills. I loved the breaks in there. Nothing sounded, everything was in time and everything sounded really, really crisp and really tight. What else do I like about it? I loved all the different breaks in there. It was dynamic. There was a lot of changes in there that was still consistent with the theme, but added variety to it. And it was dynamic. And I think that's really important. A lot of great instrumentation in there. I heard some organs, some claps, some, rock, usual rock drums. I heard some tambourine and, you know, there was a lot of fun little ear candy to kind of play with in there. And I think that was really effective as well. That would be the stuff I would say that worked really well for the track. I could keep going, but I mean, if we could, you know, if we're looking at specifics, you know, and how to improve on it, I could definitely dive into that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I would agree with you on all those points. So yeah, let's just dive into some things that he could maybe work on to improve this. Let's talk about first, because he had a big question about the leads of it, because there definitely is a lot of lead activity going on throughout this track. So do you have any comments, thoughts on, you know, what he's putting there in terms of the lead melodies and the solos and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things about indie rock and that kind of style of music is there always is room for a lead in there, especially with a guitar or an organ or some sort of rock style instrument. And there's always space because you're going to be playing those riff guitars on your, panning them pretty far out left and right. So you got that space in the middle. So a lead is really important, but it's a fine line between being too busy and not being busy enough. You got to remember, there's a lot of visual information that's going to be presented to your audience, whether it's, you know, even audio information, whether it's a voiceover or fully sound effects or, stuff that's, you know, text on the screen or whatever's happening. So you don't want to have a lead that's so busy that it's going to distract your viewers from what you're, again, back to the product idea, but what they're selling, whether it's an idea or film or whatever. So when it comes to leads, I find that in this case, the leads were pretty good. What I found was difficult was trying to listen to that bass line with the guitar at the when it started kind of riffing off on that lead, because there was a lot going on. And if this was a track I'd listen, you know, in my car or on Spotify, whatever. Yeah, it's perfect in that case because it follows that, you know, it's fun, it's unique, you know, it's got a great vibe to it. But I would hazard to say maybe simplify it a little bit, especially if you're having that bass and that guitar playing at the same time, because that bass line was really busy. And I'm a bass player. I love funky bass lines, but I also know when to pull it back a little bit and let the instrument breathe a little bit and allow it to carry the track percussively while that lead is kind of wailing and going nuts. And that way it kind of balances out the track. So I kind of felt like it was a little bit too riffy when it came to having both that lead and the bass at the same time. So, I mean, you have a couple of options there. You could easily simplify the bass, but keep that guitar kind of riffing off and having a fun lead, or you can simplify, you know, both. And that the opening riff was a good example of syncing the bass riff with the guitar riff. Like they both were kind of in sync and they played the same notes at the same time. But as soon as they kind of start playing in their own different patterns, it gets a little bit confusing for the listener. At least that's how I feel. So I would simplify the lead and I would experiment with simplifying that lead a little bit and definitely simplify the bass. And that doesn't mean you have to play the bass simplified the entire track, but maybe for at least, you know, your chorus time and when you play the breakdown, playing just like a couple of sparse notes, da 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 da, just something that allows the song to breathe a little bit. And you also have to take into consideration cue points. So if I'm working with a library, I want to make sure I have those parts that can be used in different elements of dialogue being played or different product placement or whatever. So, you know, simplifying the bass line and even the melody line might be a good way to make your track more licensable, because you're going to have more kind of bells and whistles to play with on the other end.
Absolutely, and it doesn't seem so busy and a little bit chaotic when you have all these different counterpoints sort of trying to
Yeah,
speak over each other. I was going
absolutely.
to agree the same way. The way that I would phrase it too would be, they have these really cool riffs underneath it, these kind of rhythm guitars, chunky kind of rhythm guitars, but they're so down in the mix. They're not really pushing a
Yeah,
lot of the energy forward. It really is definitely a lead focused track. I mean, the leads are basically
absolutely.
all you're kind of paying attention to for the most part in this track. And I think what happens is, and Mark, the fact that you're asking that question means that your probably instincts are correct, that you're like, this is
Absolutely.
a little bit too lead heavy, right? And it's like, yes, I think it is actually. Because I think these riffs are awesome and they got great energy. And you should be able to have 4 bars where it's just the guitar and the drums and
Yes.
maybe the bass. But it's just, I mean like rhythm, just rhythm guitar, bass, drums. Like get back to the basics of just a great
Absolutely.
energetic riff that just sounds awesome. Because then when the leads come in or a solo comes in, then it just adds to it. But right now it feels like we are sort of neglecting the fundamentals of just a great indie rock track, and we're kind of really
Yeah.
trying to put all the sparkle and shine in the high
That's a
end with
great
the
way to
lead
put it.
stuff. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I would say just you're almost working too hard here, Mark. You're trying
Yeah.
so hard to add all this like flair to it when it's like for especially for rock music and sync music, it's about the groove and it's about the riff. So if you get those two things right, you don't have to do too much fancy work on top
That's
to
right.
make it sound really licensable, because rock is really all about that just danceable, fun energy. And it's sometimes, I mean, this is less on the aggressive side. This is a little bit more playful and fun. So this is going to be a lot more about danceability and rhythm and vibe, that kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents on that one, is just let's focus more on the backbone of the track and less on the sort of window dressing, so to speak, of the guitar.
That's a
leads.
great way to put it.
Thanks. And then so let's talk about the mix and master. He also was concerned about like how things were working out there. So
Sure.
Scott, what were your thoughts sort of on how he
Well,
put it together?
I did like how the guitars were panned. The rhythm guitars, they could be louder and have a little more presence in the mix, but I did like that they gave space for the lead. Like it seemed like there was a lot of planning with regards to how the instruments were set up and gain stage and all that kind of stuff. I didn't find anything was too hot in terms of the guitars. Like it sounded crisp. It sounded it sounded real, which is always a very important factor. I didn't at any point find that the guitars were kind of clashing, and that's always something that I'm always mindful of for sure. The clapping, I feel like, and this is just my own personal preference, I love claps because they don't interfere with anything typically in a track, because it's a transient hit. So I love just putting in full in, if it's stomps and claps, I like putting them in there really loud. And I like, what I typically do is I'll actually make 2 versions of that clap, and I'll put one far left, one far right, because you're not going to hit anything, any phasing issues, I should say, with claps. So it just fills that space up. And I found that the claps were a little bit faint. The same with the cymbal crashes. I found that the cymbal crashes, and that could be the VST that Mark's using, but sometimes I only heard the crash on my left, and I'm very picky about that stuff. And I just picture myself, I'm a drummer and I'm slamming away on something, and I'm probably going to hit both cymbals at the same time rather than just the one. I mean, that's again a personal preference, but I just like a fuller sound, because I'm also mindful of alt tracks. And if I'm taking out the guitars, if I'm taking out the bass and drums, regardless of the instruments, it should be able to stand on its own as well. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying with regards to the bass and that going back to the fundamentals. So that would be something I would definitely work on, as well as the organ at the end. I have that written down. The organ, there was a bit of an organ wash / riff that I could hear at the end, but it was really faint and I really couldn't make it out. And I don't know if that's because of the phasing issues with the guitars, because they're kind of battling it out in the same frequencies. So that might be something to explore. If there's any masking issues or EQing that you could kind of toggle to see if you could get one to stand out more than the other. If you're going to use an instrument, you got to use the instrument. And if you mute mute the organ and it still sounds good, then you don't need it. But if you add it in there and you want to add it in there, you got to make sure those guitars, whether it's lead or whatever, are EQ'd enough so that organ can kind of pop through the mix and have a full presence, especially if you're trying to go for that kind of bigger ending with a lot of instruments and that, sounds fuller and lots of energy. Then you really got to go for it.
Very true. For great points. Yeah, I probably would just double down on everything you said. The only thing for me really that I wanted more was just that kind of low to mid-range energy from your rhythm guitars. And that might just be a volume issue, but it could be a little bit of boosting, a little bit of EQ for them. But the track needed a little bit more of that I don't know what that is. It's just a little bit more punch and moving air through the speakers. Essentially, that's kind of all that I was really
character.
hearing.
It's like that character to the track, right? Like
Totally,
that's where you get it, the grit.
Yeah, the mid range is a lot of the place where you get that sort of like attack that probably is a little bit missing here. I would regret not saying also that I did hear a little bit of a timing issue here towards the, what are we at? It was the 120 mark. You kind of break it down. You have this guitar and the drums. I think the guitar was rushing a little bit ahead of the drums. So just check your timing here, Mark. This is definitely something I wanted you to take a listen to.
I noticed that as well. I thought maybe it was just my ears.
No, I heard it too. Yeah. So that was the big issue that just needed to be sort of swiped out. And then also at the very end, we always want to have a definite hit ending. So I remember your track sort of stopped almost right at it was on the 4, and then there was nothing, boom, to kick at the very end.
Always end on the 1.
Want to have that. So just make sure, Mark, for all of your tracks, you can definitely just throw that bomb at the end. That's sort of like the easy, fast way to do it. But I think the smarter way to do it is to try to build in. I always talk about this, like building in a sort of sting built into your track.
Absolutely.
And that would be sort of like a false ending where you think it's going to end on 1, but instead you get a drum fill, something like that. It's 1 bar, maybe at the most half a bar.
Yeah.
And you have to have that boom, that root note, that chord, make it feel nice and definite. And what you can do is take that last 5 seconds of your track, bounce it by itself, and that becomes a sting that you send to the library that you work with. So
absolutely.
And it makes your track just a little bit more licensable. It gives you that asset you're going to need anyways. And it definitely can help you get, I think, those kind of little things that you throw on the end, those little like sparkles like at the end of your track, can definitely increase your chances of getting placements in sports. And something like this, for sure, I could see doing well in sports in terms of its licensability. Because every time you get those stings that go out from like a TV show, from a game to the commercials or coming back, you'll usually always need some sort of a sting to do like a punchy, edit. So if you're providing those with all of your tracks, you're just adding the marketability and the usability of your music. So I definitely,
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Jesse, because it was actually through your course that I discovered that. And it was one of those elements that I didn't really like. I could pick up on them when I first started playing and getting into the biz. But I really didn't know I couldn't articulate it. And then when you were playing some of your tracks, I think in one of the feedback, and it seems like whenever you do a rock track, especially sports related, you always have really creative ending stings that's, like you said, they stand out. It stands out from the rest of the track, but it still fits the mold of the actual song. And it wasn't until then, it was like one of those, light bulb moments, like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And even to this day, like when I use TuneSat and I'm able to find some of the tracks that I've had placed, they use those elements more than anything, like those tiny little stings at the end. That's all. And like, oh, I wrote a whole song, but the last, 4 seconds is what they find, like that's the nature of it. But without that, who knows, maybe that track wouldn't have got picked up. And it's that extra step. And I know what it's like. You get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm done this song. I'm done. I'm tired. It sounds okay. It sounds pretty good. I don't want to mess around with it too much, but if you just take that extra, hour or even wait overnight and come back to it and, fill in a riff at the very end to fill, something else like a sting. It's going to I think that's the big difference between a track that's licensable and just a good rock track, because both can stand well on their own, but you need to have those assets, like you said, in the actual track that they can kind of mix and match and re-edit and rearrange.
Yeah, and that's really cool that you picked that up too, because we need to see our tracks not just as one track, but we need to see each track as a series of assets that we are casting a net with and saying, all right, you can use 100%. The drum and bass version of this, the full mix, the 30-second, whatever. So you're absolutely right that, you got to see your track as not just about like, yes, we fall in love with the track because we're grooving it and making it, but you also got to kind of not fall in love with it so much and just realize that like, it might just be my bass that gets placed on this track. And I might never see,
or like the guitar by itself riff for 8 seconds or whatever.
I've had all those. And Scott, you've definitely had those placements. And you will have more of those placements where you're like, really? They wanted just the drums and bass of this kind of weird track? Okay. You never know, but you're absolutely right that you do want to incorporate as much of that into the original full mix so that when you do sparse out your deliverables, you've got all that kind of stuff. So
100%.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for time today, man. And
definitely.
I do appreciate, and I know Mark does appreciate your feedback. For all of you guys that are watching on YouTube, this is only available for our pro feedback members. Feedback like this, where you can get somebody like Scott, you can get somebody like me, or any of the other pros that you've seen on my YouTube channel to get us to listen to your music and give you feedback like this in a video format, us going through your track, listening to it and giving you notes just like this. So we encourage you that if you are serious about your sync licensing career and you are in the dark in terms of if your music is ready, or you're pretty sure it's not ready, but you don't know how to make it ready for libraries, I guarantee you will not find a better service and a more professional and fast service. This is super. You sign up today and you can get your track reviewed by the end of the week. It's a very, very quick service. You don't have to wait until some session later on to get your reviews. You can shop for which pro you want to work with. You submit to them. And by that, at the end of that week, essentially, you will have a review right there on our platform. And then while you're waiting, you get to go watch everybody else's reviews if you want to. There are
valuable.
Hundreds of other reviews. Scott's done hundreds of them already. So you can definitely go in there and watch what everybody else has done and listen and see what can you learn from other people's reviews. So lots of knowledge, lots of education, and you're going to get a lot of amazing feedback from this service. So we encourage you. There's a link in the description box. You can learn a little bit more about it if you'd like to. So Scott, man, thank you so much for your time today, buddy.
Anytime. Thank you.